We are less than 2 weeks away from the 2023-2024 college football playoffs. Two very exciting games, two matchups who are very different from each other, but each unique in their own right. I'm joined by special guest Kelley Ford, known as for his Twitter account. He is with thelines.com. A fun follow on Twitter. You can find him at KFordRatings. He is known for his power rankings, his watchability ratings, and of course his famous what if rankings. Those are personally my favorite. I look forward to those every week, both college and NFL football. So let's get into it, man. Alabama versus Michigan, the 1 versus 4. Michigan 13-0. Great season from them. And what's even more impressive is that they did it without their head coach for half of the way. Truly can't say enough about that team and what they were able to do. Now, did they really beat a lot of adversity? Not really, considering the circumstances, but they made it 13-0 all the way through the Big Ten. Alabama, there's no team that's been more improved than that team, in my opinion. Nick Saban has crushed it. Truly been one of the kind of most polarizing turnarounds that I've seen within a season in recent memory. So lots of different storylines, lots of different angles. But to me, the biggest matchup in this one, Jalen Milroe versus Michigan defense. Jalen Milroe, he really came onto the scene later in the season, beat a lot of very good teams, and he really did it with his arm, truthfully. He's really known for running with his legs, but what's been impressive to me is he has one of the prettiest deep balls in college football, ending the season like that, the way he did. So before I get into any of the numbers and what I got, Kelley, what do you think about this game? Michigan's a 1.5 point favorite. It started off at 2.5, closed down to 1.5. Wouldn't be surprised if it closed down even more. Alabama, there's 75% of the tickets, according to Action Network, that is on Alabama, and 84% of the handle coming in on Alabama. So what's your gut feeling about this? What do you think?
Yeah, Harry. Well, first, I appreciate you having me on. It's always fun talking college football, and of course, the playoff is the culmination of the regular season and all the games that we love watching every single Saturday. So, for this game in particular, you mentioned for you, it comes down to Jalen Milroe against that Michigan defense. And so, if I kind of go off of that, I think that's a fair assessment because this Michigan defense, for me, is the number one defense in the entire country. They have been the number one defense in the entire country since week 10. They started the year number 3. They didn't get any worse than that, right? So this is a defense that we knew was going to be good. They have played up to that standard, even exceeded that standard. And Michigan's a team as a whole, they've improved their power rating, not just on the defensive side of the ball, Harry, but on the offense plus defense, their whole Kelley Ford power rating. It has improved more than 5 points from preseason to current. That puts them in the top 25 on my list of kind of rating movement teams, 1 to 133. They're in the top 25 of that. So both sides playing really well. The defense in particular, as you mentioned, if we look at the other kind of top defenses that Alabama has played this year, just by my current unit ranks right now, you've got Georgia, I have as the number 6 defensive unit in the country. Texas, all the way back in week 2, of course, a game that carried a lot of weight for the committee, the number 10 defense in the country. Outside of that, Texas A&M's number 14, Auburn's number 19, right? So even though Alabama played an incredibly difficult schedule, they weren't necessarily playing top-end defenses week in and week out. Now, of course, they don't get to play their own defense in a game. They see them in practice every day, which is probably more important for Jalen Milroe. But Alabama's defense, for me, number 7 in their own right. So I do think that's a big matchup question mark in this game is Jalen Milroe, that number 12 Alabama offense against the number 1 Michigan defense. Because, Harry, on the other side, that's number 7 Alabama defense, as I just said, against the number 7 Michigan offense. So not sure how much is in it on that side. The question will be, can Jalen Milroe and that Alabama offense do enough? I've just given you all my unit numbers. Michigan is my number 1 power-rated team overall. I actually have them as the favorite in this game by more than Vegas. My numbers make this Michigan minus 4.5. So I know it opened 2.5, like you said, bet down to 1.5. I actually think it got lower than that. Maybe it's come back up a little bit if I'm not mistaken on that. So my model says there is value in Michigan, especially at 1.5, crossing that important number of 3 there. But that being said, like, Kelley, what does your gut say? I would not be surprised at all if Alabama wins this game. Nick Saban with 3-4 weeks to prepare. Man, he's hard enough to beat, like, just in general. Give him that much time to prepare and scheme it up. I also am not sure how favorable the matchups are. Like the individual stylistic matchups here are for Michigan. I actually think Alabama probably has the edge in those matchups, kind of across the board, or at least in the important positions. For Alabama, Harry, you said they've improved greatly over the course of the year, and I will say, of course, their play has improved since losing to Texas in week 2, since beating USF on the road by only 2 touchdowns in week 3. From a power rating standpoint, Alabama came into the year number 3 for me. They had a power rating of 26.1 after the Middle Tennessee game, where they looked really, really good. I mean, they won by 49 points or whatever it was. They looked really good in that game. They actually improved to the number 1 power rated team in the country for me. Then the Texas game happened. Then the USF game happened. They fell all the way to number 10 in the power ratings going into the Tennessee game in week 8. They have since steadily improved since then. They come into this game power rated number 6 for me overall. I already gave the unit ranks number 7 on defense, 12 on offense. So from a power rating standpoint, this team is actually power rated worse now than they were at the beginning of the year, but they are power rated better now than they were at their lowest point, of course, halfway through the season. So my gut tells me Alabama's going to find a way. The power ratings say Michigan is the most complete team. Michigan's floor, Harry, the way that I've kind of talked about Michigan this year, their floor is just higher than any other team's floor. Like they really don't play bad games. There was a 7-point win at Maryland, if you're going to call that maybe a game where you expected more from them. But there's really not a game this year where you look at it and you say, yeah, they just didn't show up. It took a little bit longer than the model expected in the early part of the season for them to pull away from some teams that aren't very good opponents. But by the end of the game, it was very clear, like, yeah, this Michigan team, they're in control. They've got it. So their floor, I think, is probably the highest in the country. Alabama's ceiling, I think, is higher than Michigan's ceiling. So if both of these teams play an A-plus game, I think Alabama wins it. The problem is Michigan on average, the problem for Alabama, I should say, is Michigan on average has played closer to that A-plus game on a consistent basis than Alabama has. Certainly Alabama's coming off a really good performance against Georgia, but just the week before that at Auburn, and I know it's the Iron Bowl. It's a huge rivalry. They're on the road. Like, all those factors need to be considered. Yep. But let's not forget, it took 4th and goal from the 31 for them to win that game. So it's not like it's not like Alabama's been a juggernaut all year. They've really found their stride here in the SEC Championship game, and with a month to prepare, my gut tells me, just because I've seen it so many times before, my gut tells me Nick Saban will have them ready, and it'll be a good game. I will say before we transition to the other game, Harry, the winner of this game, both by my numbers and in my gut, will be a favorite in the national championship game against whoever wins the other semifinal.
Absolutely. And a couple of things to touch on there. And what is super interesting that Alabama started up high in your power rankings, because, the narrative coming into the season was this is not going to be the same Alabama teams that we've seen. And so that keys to me, because, I do a show with Brendan. He was big on Alabama the entire season because 3 of the top 6 rated recruiting classes of all time are on campus at Alabama right now. The only thing that they didn't have was that 5-star quarterback. And lo and behold, look at what Jalen Monroe's turned into. So that's very interesting to me. And I'm, that kind of proves a little bit in your power ratings, because you can't ignore that. You can't ignore the talent that Alabama has on that roster. And that kind of leads me to a question that I have. It's one thing I have written down is there a quarterback that Michigan has faced that is like Jalen Monroe? And, you think about some of the bigger games on their schedule. They had Kyle McCord against Ohio State. They had Drew Aller at Penn State, who was really kind of a disappointment, at times throughout the year. He didn't really flash his arm talent as much as I'd really hope so. But again, true freshman, we'll see next year or the following year. But I can't think, maybe Indiana, but they had Taven Jackson who came in. He did really well, but still, there's nobody that really matches the profile of Jalen Monroe. Is anybody come to the top of your mind?
I would agree with you that there's really not a direct comp. As I'm looking at their schedule here, it might be the game I mentioned earlier, the only game you say, hey, we probably expect you to win by more. Talia Tagovailoa, maybe, like at Maryland. Is he maybe a somewhat comparable comp to Jalen Monroe? I mean, I think you're stretching there, but he's probably the closest for me with regard to what Michigan has played. So I think that's fair. I mean, this is if we look at, I did the breakdown of Alabama, and this is the best defense that they've played all year, and it will continue to be. This is the best offense that Michigan's defense will face all year. I can give you the breakdown quickly of what Michigan's defense has faced in terms of opposing offenses so far. Alabama at number 12, that's the best offense that this defense has faced. If outside of that, if you're looking at the unit ranks here, it's not great. Ohio State's offense, which coming into the year I thought was going to be a top 2 or 3 offense, just didn't quite get it done at the quarterback position. And of course, McCord has transferred now to Syracuse since the end of the year. Number 17 is that Ohio State offense for me in terms of unit rankings. That's the best offense they faced to this point. And so outside of that, I mean, I'm going to, as I look quickly, number 24, Penn State. Again, I had high hopes for Drew Aller and that offense as well. You touched on maybe not quite living up to it this year. Let's see moving forward what he's able to do in 2024. Outside of that, the next best offense, I mean, those are the 2 top 25s. Outside of that, Maryland's at 43. UNLV, believe it or not, is that number 45.
That's wild.
Yeah, you're coming off a game where you just faced the number 125 Iowa offense. We could do a whole segment on that on a different show. But yeah, I think it's a good question, and it's something that we definitely need to be watching for on that side of the ball. This is the best opposing offense that Michigan's defense has faced, and it's the best opposing defense that Alabama's offense has faced. So, and you'd expect that. This is a college football playoff, right? Like, this is the pinnacle. This is that culmination. So I think all of that comes into this. I will also say, back to the point about Alabama and their power rating, 2 things here. In the preseason, I wrote an article for thelines.com. They asked me to take a look. Okay, look at the current odds being offered by sportbooks to win the national championship. Kelley, run that through, put those up against what your model's saying, how the season's kind of going to be simulated and who you expect to be there at the end. There were only two teams in terms of what the odds being offered were. That it was actually, it would be a good bet based on what my numbers are saying their chances are to make the CFP and to win the national championship versus what Vegas is offering those odds at. And of course, it makes sense. Vegas is gonna put out offers that or lines that favor them. There were 2 value bets, if you will, and they weren't huge values, but it was plus expected value. One of them was Ohio State. They come within 1 possession on the road at Michigan from being in the CFP, most likely. That one's out the window, though. The other one was Alabama, which was kind of hard to believe because people were saying what you were saying, like, I don't know if this is the team. And by my own power ratings right now, Harry, this is the worst Alabama team since 2013. It's the worst crazy Alabama team in a decade. Yet here I am saying, yeah, I think they probably win the national championship because that's just what they do. So, yes, this is a down year for Alabama. I said consistently over the course of this year on the Lions podcast, on We Hate Your Team, on any podcast I was on, any radio I was talking on, people had asked about Alabama. And my answer was always, this is not even close to the best Alabama team that Nick Saban's had in Tuscaloosa. In fact, it's one of the worst, if not the worst, they've had in a decade or 15 years. However, Alabama doesn't have to be better than the previous versions of itself. Alabama only has to be better than the opponents on its schedule in 2023, which is exactly what they have been, with the exception, of course, of that week 2 game at home against Texas. And so, all of that needs to be considered here. Well, I'm talking about the best or worst team since when. By my power ratings, Harry, this is something that I had to double check multiple times coming into bowl season here. Michigan, this is the highest I have had Michigan power rated in my data set, which goes back to the beginning of college football. Again, it's estimated ratings the farther back in time you go. But I have at least an estimated power rating for every single team that's ever played at the highest level of college football. This is the best Michigan has ever been power rated. And this is a storied program, a blue blood, multiple national championships. The last time Michigan finished number 1 in my power ratings was 1964. So it's been a very, very long time since Michigan has been number 1 in my power ratings, and it's never happened that they've had a power rating what they do right now, which is 28.0. That means that on a neutral field, my numbers suggest Michigan is 28 points, 4 touchdowns better than the average FBS team. So that's kind of the scaling of the power ratings there. That's at a high level what the historical numbers are saying about these 2 versions of these programs here in 2023.
Right. And with this Michigan team, what really blows my mind is they are so good. There's a lot of people that over the past few games that they've played that they've knocked JJ McCarthy for only throwing the ball 8 times. But you take a step back and look at it from the big picture. If you're winning games and you're only throwing the ball 8 times, you're doing something right. Truth be told. And so if you don't have to throw the ball, if you don't have to put the ball in the air, why not? You know, you have 2 elite rushers. You have one of the best graded offensive line. I have Michigan PFF graded at the number 9th team overall in run blocking. So why do that? And we will probably have to see JJ McCarthy do more than he has. Actually, it's inevitable in a game like this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm very curious to see what he's capable of. We've seen him flash some big plays, especially last year. I feel like last year we really saw more of JJ McCarthy and what he is able to do, albeit in a game where they lost against TCU, but he's going to have to do more. And so that's one thing that concerns me. And another thing that concerns me is Alabama. One of the most improved part of their teams is, one, their offensive line. They were one of the worst teams in terms of sacks allowed to begin the season. And 2, their secondary wasn't its typical, bulletproof secondary. We saw teams like Tennessee air it out in the first half of that game and run up a lot of points. We've seen, we saw Texas and what Texas did in their own house at the beginning of the season. But again, not that's the Alabama team of earlier in the season. We're talking about the Alabama team of now. And if you watch the Georgia game, 2 things popped out. One, their DBs were everywhere. There was never a time where Brock Bowers or Ladd McConkey was wide open. Never. And so that's one thing that sticks out to me. And we know Nick Saban, he's known for coaching up the DBs. So naturally, look at where they are. Most improved unit on the defensive side of the ball for sure. And then their offensive line. I've never seen a team go head to head with Georgia and beat them in the trenches like Alabama did. You can probably pull out a lot of explosive plays, beat Georgia, whatever. But for a team like Alabama to go in there and bully Georgia's trenches, that's impressive in its own right. And I think that's what Michigan has to worry about. I think the improvement in both the secondary and the offensive and defensive line for Alabama is really what concerns me. And of course, JJ McCarthy having to do what he has to do. Naturally, he hasn't done it the entire season. But another question for you, Jim Harbaugh being back, you mentioned something. Nick Saban, you give him a month to prepare. He's one of the best to ever do it, the best to ever do it. But Jim Harbaugh being back with the team for a full month, what kind of significance do you think that brings to this Michigan team?
Yeah, I think it's very significant, and I think you saw what the absence of Jim Harbaugh meant from a rallying standpoint, that the Michigan players and coaching staff were able to kind of galvanize themselves around, hey, our coach, our leader is, in their eyes, being unjustly, unfairly punished. It gave Michigan a reason to have a chip on their shoulder. It gave them a reason to be ticked off. And that they use that, and they use that in the game against Maryland. Of course, they use that in the game, at Penn State, then Maryland, and then the Ohio State game. Now, he was back, of course, for the Iowa game in the Big Ten Championship. So it's not like you're going to get this bump from him returning in the playoff, because they have had him back now for a game. But yeah, anytime you're playing with your head coach, I expect the team to be better than when they're not with their head coach, right? I mean, and that makes sense, but there is that motivational aspect that, of course, they use very well. So I think, honestly, the more interesting storyline here for me, Harry, as we talk about it, is, so Michigan's 13-0. Harbaugh was not there for 6 of those wins. And so, to me, it's more of almost a administrative question for the University of Michigan to be like, he's our guy, right? Like he's our native son. He is a Michigan man. He has brought us back to prominence in terms of winning Big Ten championships, making the college football playoff, all these things that they haven't done in a very long time. He is doing that. At what cost, I think, is what some in and around the administration or the university are asking. I'm not commenting one way or another on that, but yes, the fact that he is there and will be on the sideline, I certainly think that if nothing else, it's the calming influence on JJ McCarthy. I think I want to be clear about what I'm saying here, because every head coach and quarterback likely, again, I'm not in these locker rooms, I would imagine every head coach and quarterback have a bond, a special bond that they're connected forever. Like, no matter how it ends, no matter how, if you win, lose, draw the game, they're connected forever. It seems to me, as an outsider, and I've said this kind of cautiously for the last really year and a half now, since JJ McCarthy took over for Cade McNamara back in the 2022 season, early in that year, it has felt like there is just, like, I don't know how to, an extra special connection or bond between JJ McCarthy and Jim Harbaugh.
Right.
I don't know if Jim Harbaugh like sees himself in JJ McCarthy, right? Because he's a former Michigan quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there's some family connection where these two like go back. Like I really don't know. It just when I see them interact, and again, I'm only seeing when the cameras are there, so I'm not seeing anything else, obviously. It just feels like there's some deeper connection between the two of them than I see on a lot of sidelines between a head coach and a quarterback, even though there are connections in on all those teams. So to me, and you talked about we're going to need to see something from JJ McCarthy in this game that we haven't had to see all year because his run game's been really good, his offensive line's been really good, and his defense has been outstanding. The last time JJ McCarthy was asked to do a lot in a game, and maybe this is unfair to him, the last time really he was asked to do a lot in a game was the TCU game last year, and that was a heck of a game. TCU obviously comes out on top. It could have very easily gone the other way. A couple calls here, a couple calls there, right? I mean,
Right.
Michigan was in that game. It's not like they got bullied off the field. They were in that game, but they did lose. So how will he respond to getting his number called here? I think having Harbaugh on the sideline, for whatever it's worth, I think it's a calming influence for him. And I do think that will make a difference. And again, Michigan's going to be better when Jim Harbaugh is on the sideline than when he's not. That's why, Harry, I don't know if you know this. It's kind of, I've said it on other podcasts. Like, I'm actually an Ohio State fan. So I'm devastated. I'm devastated by what Michigan has been able to continue to do to Ohio State. I would personally love to see Jim Harbaugh no longer at Michigan. And here's why. Because he scares me. He's a really good coach. When Michigan hired Jim Harbaugh back in 2015 season, going into the 2015 season, I think it was, when they were going through that process, I said, and because Ohio State has Urban Meyer, just won a national championship, all these things, right? I said, I don't really care who they hire as long as it's not Jim Harbaugh, because Jim Harbaugh is the only one here that scares me. Out of all the people they were talking about, Jim Harbaugh is the only one that scares me. Well, lo and behold, they hired Jim Harbaugh, and for a long time, I mean, many years there in a row, he couldn't get over the hump. He couldn't do it. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, can Ohio State please land the knockout punch to get him out of there? Because he's going to turn it around. Like I told my friends that, I told my family that. I wasn't on social media at that time, so I wasn't like broadcasting it on Twitter or X or anything. But like I was telling anyone that would listen, like they're like, Kelley, why are you worried? You keep beating him. You haven't lost to him in forever. I said he's going to turn it around, and I'm very nervous for when that happens. He has turned it around, and it hasn't gone back the other way. And so, as an Ohio State fan, I want Jim Harbaugh to leave the University of Michigan. I want him to go to the NFL or do whatever. I just want him to be gone so that Ohio State can have a chance to win that game. As a college football fan, I love that Jim Harbaugh is at Michigan because it's just a Michigan man should be leading Michigan. And I say that as an Ohio State fan. Michigan man should be leading Michigan. It's good for the rivalry. It's good for that program. And they are a blue blood. I might really not like them, but they're a blue blood and they deserve respect. And they are the kings of the Big Ten, and they have been now for 3 years. Ohio State fans don't like hearing that. Got to beat them. You got to beat them on the field. That's what it is. So anyway, I've probably gone on too long there. So Michigan is a great program. They are better when Jim Harbaugh is on the sideline, and I do expect him being there to have a positive effect and influence on J.J. McCarthy in a game in which Michigan's going to need J.J. McCarthy.
Yeah, I struggled with both of these picks, honestly, trying to deduce who I think is going to win. I do have Michigan. My projections have Michigan by 2. So, naturally I'm riding with Michigan and the projections, but it's not something I'm comfortable with. Alabama is there's nobody that has more momentum than Alabama, coming into the playoffs. So, no confidence whatsoever, but Michigan, I agree. The better defense, the better team, the better trenches, per my grading. So I'm really not confident. I know I've said that, but I'm riding Michigan. I think they are the better team. I think this is Harbaugh's year. He's only progressed as a coach, in his success. You said he wasn't able to get to that hump. Well, he hit a wall, he broke it. He hit another wall, he broke it. And so it felt like Ohio State, then the Big Ten, and then the college football playoffs. And here we are. This is his chance to break that wall again. So see what Michigan can do. All right. Let's move on to a completely different styled game in Washington versus Texas. In a game where we have where points will come at a premium between Alabama and Michigan, we have a game where they won't come at a premium. It very well could hit the over, even though it's priced at 64.5 points. So In a dome on the turf, we get a fully healthy Washington Huskies team. And Kalen DeBoer, Coach of the Year, versus Steve Sarkisian's Texas Longhorns. Two of the best offensive minds in college football, in my opinion. I think Steve Sarkisian is one of the better play callers in the sport. And there's no in-game coach where I really think who's more aggressive and more confident in himself than Kalen DeBoer. Again, he just won Coach of the Year for a reason. And again, I mentioned the Washington Huskies coming in fully healthy. This is huge. Phoenix was hurt down the stretch. I think that's not really much of a secret. A couple of their wide receivers were hurt, banged up, and all they had to do was make it, and they did. So they get the month off. They come into this game relatively healthy, if not fully healthy. So they get their full weaponry. Coming into this game, there's a narrative of Washington's defense is not that great. Texas, of course, is power rated higher. I believe that's accurate. I do think Texas has the better roster, in my opinion, but there's a couple things I want to touch on later down the road about why I think the narrative is a little misconceived in a way. But looking at this game, Texas minus 4-point favorites in the dome. What's your gut reaction to this? What's your rating say? What's your model say? Let me know. Give it to me all.
Yeah. So the model here has Texas minus 5.5. And so from a raw talent standpoint, yeah, you're right. On paper, Texas is the better team, the more talented team. And that's what the model's seeing. That's what the model is trying to capture. That's what the model is built on. And that's what the model's had success with, like historically over the years. And so I feel very good about handicapping this game, power rating this game, and saying Texas is the more talented team. If we look at these unit ranks, Texas, the number 9 offense in the country, and they have the number 10 defense in the country. So they're top 10 on both sides of the ball. They're number 7 for me in the power ratings overall. They started the year number 6, Harry, and outside of 1 week, the week after the Rice game, so the first week of the season, they beat Rice 37-10. They don't really look convincing doing it. So the model downgraded them a couple points, and it was really, really tight in that range. So they actually fell all the way to number 12 going into the Alabama game. We know how the Alabama game went. Texas has now been in the top 10 every single week since then. So there's only been 1 week all year where Texas hasn't been a top 10 power rated team for me. They've been number 7 here, basically since going into the conference championship game. They're a really, really good team. Washington is a phenomenal offense. I have this offense number 4 in the country. They actually spent 1 week at number 1. That was the week after the Oregon game, going to Arizona State, or hosting Arizona State. They actually only won 15-7 in that game, and the model said, okay, hang on, maybe we overreacted here. So they've been at number 4 now since that time. Number 4 offense in the country. My biggest question about this team has been all year and will continue to be until the end of the season, the defense. I have the defense power rated number 40. Coming into the year, I had them number 50. So this team, this unit has performed better over the course of the year than I projected. However, they were up to number 23 at one point, 5-6 weeks into the season, and they have fallen steadily since that point down to where they are now, number 40. So it's a defense that is regressing, if you will, back towards kind of what we expected at the beginning of the year, and they've been doing that throughout the back half of the season here. The biggest question I have is that defense going to be able to get enough stops against this Quinn Ewers-led offense that I said I have power rated right now number 9? If you look at the offenses that this unit has faced, they played the Oregon offense twice. And they won those games both times. Oregon scores 31 in the conference championship game after scoring 33 in the regular season game. But that Oregon offense, for me, is the number 1 power-rated offense in the entire country. They played Caleb Williams in that USC offense. And we talk about what that USC team is. And because of the defense, the team didn't have the year they wanted. From a power rating standpoint and from a production standpoint, even opponent adjusted, that USC offense, still really, really good. I mean, it's number 3 offense in the country for me. So they played that offense. They beat that offense. Now they gave up 42 points to them, but their own offense with Michael Penix was able to put up 52 because that USC defense isn't very good. No, Oregon State, number 18 on offense. Arizona, actually number 14. Boise State, all the way back in the first week of the season, number 25 on offense. So this Washington defense has played good offenses, and they played offenses by my own numbers that are better than Texas's. I will be curious to see if they're able to get enough stops in this game. Flipping it to Washington as a whole, I've talked about Texas and their power rating and their raw talent and all that. Washington as a whole, Harry, they have, as I look it up really quickly, they have played in the regular season 6 one possession and or overtime games, and they won all 6 of them. Add in the conference championship, and now it's up to 7. No other team has more than 4 in that. No other team is more than +4 in one possession wins, if you will. So basically, all the games that ended as one possession or overtime for you, what is your net win-loss record? Washington's is +7, meaning they won 7 more of those types of games than they lost. They went 7-0. The next highest team in that number is 4. Central Michigan, Iowa, James Madison, Louisville, Missouri, Ole Miss, Toledo, Tulane, all +4, at least at the end of the regular season. Washington has had a knack to win close games, to win games that they shouldn't have won. By my own numbers, they were a projected underdog. It was a pick'em game, but I had a 48% chance to win against Oregon in the regular season. Another pick'em game, but a 49% chance to win at USC in the regular season. And then my numbers made them an 8.5-point underdog to Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game. So I was right against the spread. I wasn't right straight up. And people said, "See, Kelley, your model's wrong." And I said, actually, if I'm looking at this, my model's actually right, because Vegas was telling us it's going to be a 9.5, 10-point game. I'm saying it's going to be 8.5. Now they end up winning it outright, which is what matters. But I still feel very good about how the model was power rating those teams. It drives people nuts. If those two teams were to play again tomorrow on a neutral field, I'd have Oregon as a favorite. And in my own mind, I'm saying, okay, I don't like that, but I understand why the model is doing that based on what it's looking at. And again, the model's right more than it's wrong. It doesn't matter 100, but it's right more than it's wrong. So for me, Washington continues to win some games that they shouldn't. And also, I pulled this up real quick too. Kalen DeBoer, if I look at him, let me really quickly try to find this. I tweeted about it the other day. His head coaching career record, I'm just going to give it to you, 103-11. He has won 90+% of his games as a coach at the college football level. That's regardless of where he was, because he spent some time at Sioux Falls, he spent some time at Fresno State, and of course here at Washington, he's 24-2 in his 2 years at Washington. He's won. I don't even know how many games in a row it is at this point. They won 13 this year. They ended last year winning a handful in a row too. I mean, they've won, I think, 20+ games in a row right now. They might have the longest winning streak of the country now that Georgia's lost. I'm not sure. You have to fact check me on that, but I think they probably do. Kalen DeBoer just wins games. I don't know how else to chalk it up, as the model says Texas -5.5. In my gut, I kind of think Texas is the better team, but this is 2 games in a row where I'm going to say, I think Washington probably finds a way to win, because it's just what they do. This Husky team, it's just what they do. I have them power rated number 13. Texas is power rated number 7. If I quickly give you what historically, how are these teams? This is the best Washington team in my data set since 2017. This is the best Texas team in my data set since 2009. If we look at the seasons that these two teams had, really just Washington has improved their power rating by 5 points since the preseason. That's top 25 nationally. They won 3.5 more regular season games than my preseason realistic expectations projected. That's number 5 in the country. They were the number 5 biggest overachiever by my numbers in the regular season this year. Texas on those lists, they're number 37 on the rating movement list, and then they're number 30 overachiever. They won about a game and a half more than I projected. I did expect Texas to win the Big 12 coming into the year. I had Washington. My numbers favored USC ever so slightly, with actually Oregon number 2. Washington was number 3 for me. It was very, very tight. USC was actually about a half game to a game favorite in the projected conference standings. But I said at the time, all it takes is one upset for them to fall back to the pack. Well, they experienced a handful of those as the defense really fell off a cliff late in the year. So it really was Washington, Oregon kind of in that next pack, with Utah was also right there too. Of course, their season didn't go as planned. No Cam Rising all year. But Washington just had a great year, and Kalen DeBoer wins. So that's like the least analytical comment I'm ever going to make. But it's just, they just find a way, man. I expect this to be a really, really, really good game.
Yeah, I figured you would appreciate it just as much as I will. One of the most frustrating teams for me all year has been Washington. I owe a big apology to that football team because of how much I've picked against them in a lot of those big game spots. But truthfully, they are one of the most frustrating teams that, I've worked on my projections with, because you're right. I would have them. I would have Oregon favored in a game like that again. I would have Texas favored. My projections have Texas favored. My projections have everybody favored against Washington that's in the playoffs. And so one of the truly most frustrating teams that I've worked with from a projection standpoint, but it's truly impressive because, I at least get so engulfed in a lot of the stats and the metrics and the analytics behind the game that it's almost refreshing to have a team like Washington defy the odds. And it really reminds me of, they're not the same style football team, but it reminds me of TCU last year. The same instance where they have all of these close calls. I specifically remember TCU playing Baylor last year, where they sprinted onto the field and they hit the last minute field goal and walked off with a win. That's the beauty of this game. And so that reminds me of the same run that TCU went on last year. And so truly special what this team has been able to do. But again, one of the most frustrating teams I've dealt with from a projection standpoint. And so, again, my model does have Texas winning outright, Texas by 6. And it's I can't trust that. Washington's given me every reason not to trust it up until this point. And so it's amazing because for a defense that rates as bad as Washington, they've still done pretty well. And that's kind of the narrative that's coming into this game is, their defense, metrically speaking, is not good. They actually have they rank 90th in FBS in terms of adjusted defensive success rate. That's not good, of course. But look at what they did to start the game off against the Pac-12 championship. They went punt, field goal, punt, up 17-3. And I didn't realize that Oregon was your number 1 overall power rated offense. I think that's even more impressive for that Washington defense. That's not, I don't want to say turning around, because you can still beat that defense. And I certainly think Quinn Ewers will at times. Steve Sarkisian loves to stretch the field. So I definitely think there's going to be points scored in this game, but it's too, again, Washington, I think if you were to hand me a piece of paper and you were to give me, the metrics and the stats and all of that, and you were to blind me from these teams, I'm taking Texas. It's a smart thing to do. And when you look at the roster ratings as well, that team is more talented, but it's almost like Washington, what they've been doing all year, they've had 0 running game as well. In fact, they rank 98th nationally in rushing yards per game. It doesn't matter. Michael Penix has been able to literally put the team on his arm and take them to the promised land. And so when I look at this, I look at Texas, their biggest weakness on defense is their secondary. Washington's biggest strength on their offense, their wide receiver core and their quarterback. So it's almost like I have more faith in Washington and their biggest strength to exploit Texas's biggest weakness. Now, Texas's offense can have a field day on this defense, and certainly I think they will keep up. But we have seen nothing up until this point where Washington's going to slow down offensively. In fact, they're only going to speed it up. They're only healthier. So the only concern for me for Washington is Texas's defensive front is mean. They are truly one of the best units in the Big 12 and one of the best units in the country. And so the only concern for me for that Washington team is, will they be able to protect Michael Penix? So if Texas can get to the quarterback, I think they win this game. If they can't, I think Washington's going to have a field day with this Texas secondary. Fair?
Very fair. And I'm going to go back to one of the things you said right at the beginning of this Washington team. Reminds you a little bit of TCU last year, and I agree. And it's not just because they're both purple. There's similarities between these two teams, almost to the point that as you were talking there, Harry, I was talking in my mind, envisioning I could see this Washington team beating Texas in a game that they're an underdog, just like TCU beat Michigan in a game they were an underdog. And honestly, I could see them carrying that forward to a national championship game against whether it's Alabama or Michigan. I could see him getting run off the field, because that's the defense of either Alabama or especially Michigan could probably neutralize the Washington offense, and I'm not sure the Washington defense would be able to slow down either one of those offenses. And again, same thing here with the can they slow down the Texas offense? Something that hasn't been said, we've alluded to it. Something that hasn't been said. The more time you have to prepare for a game. And that's why the semifinal is so different. And it's going to be we're going to have to adjust in the 12-team era because these games are going to come at a more frequent pace because they have to spread them out, right? Play the first round, play the quarters, then the semi, then the national championship game. The way that we're set up now, and it was even, I don't want to say worse, but there was a longer layoff when it was the BCS national championship game. You went from playing a conference championship game in some cases, like back when Ohio State, and I'm using Ohio State as an example because I remember those games very, very well. Ohio State, the Big Ten didn't have a conference championship game at that time. So they were playing your last game against Michigan on Thanksgiving weekend, and then you're not playing, whether it was LSU or Florida in the national championship game, until the second week of January. I mean, that is a month and a half, maybe more off from your last game to the national championship game. We've condensed that now with everybody playing a conference championship game, and now the semifinal being around the New Year, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, whatever it is. That now you're looking at, a month, maybe a little bit less of time off. That's still a big gap and much more than teams are used to during the regular season. Obviously, the longer you have to prepare, in theory, and I think it actually works out this way in practice too, the better it is for the underdog. Or a really good coach who can just use the time, which again, they all can, but Nick Saban, we've talked about, has that ability. I think the long layoff here and the maximum time to prepare is nothing against Steve Sarkisian, which actually, let me come back to that a second because I just thought of something I want to say too. But Kalen DeBoer, again, he just finds ways to win games that he's not favored to, wins games he's not supposed to, quote unquote. The longer layoff, I think that favors Washington here, and it's just I think it favored TCU last year. That's where I was going with this whole thing, and we saw what happened in that game. So we will see. Washington in 2023 is not TCU in 2022 from the style of which they're playing these games.
Exactly.
From a power rating standpoint, they are very, very similar, especially with regard to how they stack up against the other CFP contenders. The Steve Sarkisian thing that I hadn't mentioned yet, didn't have in any notes or anything, but I just realized as I'm talking about these two coaches, I don't think we're talking enough about, and clearly I'm not, Steve Sarkisian going up against his former team. Like, he spent time as the head coach at Washington, and he didn't have a ton of success. Now, I know he was taking over for a team that had really been down in the dumps. I think, Tyrone Willingham, was he the coach at Washington prior to him, maybe? There were some down years for Washington. You don't have to remind Washington fans of that. They went 0-12, I want to say, in 2008, maybe, something like that. And so Sarkisian comes in, shortly after that, gets them back to, winning 6-7 games, I think, on a consistent basis. Before then, he goes to USC for a stint there. So I don't think enough's being talked about Sarkisian going up against his former team here in Washington. Maybe because it's been so long, and he's had multiple stops in between now and then. Got himself healthy and take care of himself and everything that he needs to do, which is obviously way more important than any football stuff. But he's in a great place now, killing it at Texas, and Texas is back, and he is responsible with others, but he is primarily responsible for bringing them back. And so I think that's an interesting subplot here in this game. I know Washington fans haven't forgotten that Sarkisian was their coach, and I'm pretty sure Steve Sarkisian hasn't forgotten he spent a few years on the sidelines in Seattle.
Right. Yeah. And, it's funny you say that. When I was reading over a few articles a couple weeks ago when the rankings just came out, I totally forgot about him being there. I it didn't even cross my mind until I read about it. And so, that's a good point. It's a fun little tidbit there. I'm sure we'll see some sort of documentary or short coming into leading up to the game. So lots to be excited about. I think it's going to be great. Obviously, the playoffs are great. Everybody's looking forward to it. But, this is two different style games that we get to look forward to. We get to kind of see two powerhouses go against each other and then two electric offenses go against each other. And, circling back to the Texas and Washington for me, I'm going to ride with Washington, not confidently saying this, but they've given me every reason to ride with them. And I'm probably jinxing them now. If you're a Washington fan watching this, I apologize because I have picked against Washington every single game leading up to this moment. And I just don't want to do that anymore. And I think that from a coaching perspective, I don't want to sit here and say Kalen DeBoer is the better coach, the superior coach. But to me, what he's been able to do in game and how aggressive he is, I love it. He's going to get the nod from me as well in that department. And, I said it again, I said it before and I'll say it again. Washington being fully healthy, I think, is truly the most underrated aspect in this game. I read an article about Rome Odunze had broken ribs from the last game, and McMillan was also beat up a little bit. Penix, he had that weird injury that nobody really knew about, where he was like visibly emotional after the game. So, riding with Washington, again, no confidence in any of my picks, to be honest with you. I know it's probably bad coming as an analyst sitting here, but I'm truly just excited for the games. And there's so much going into this game, and there's so many matchups that you can isolate in a vacuum and point out that that's going to be the matchup of the game and the deciding factor. But truth is, it's who's going to bring their A game. We know who's going to win if they bring their A game, but it's a matter of preparation and who wants it more. And so I think that's what I'm most excited about, is because in recent memory and all of the playoffs that we've seen, we've only got one kind of good game, like really good matchup. And then there's one matchup that's kind of like, man, it's, probably could have done a little bit better here. But, we have two spreads that are less than 5 points. So super excited for this. Albeit I know the Florida State drama, that's a conversation that we've had before and don't want to dig back up again. But I truly think we got the best matchup with Alabama and Michigan. So looking forward to it. Kelley, man, thank you so much for joining us. Again, guys, if you're watching, you can find him at Kelley Ford Ratings on X/Twitter, fortheline.com. Appreciate you being here. We will talk to you guys later.